A waitress poured coffee for the same frail old man every morning for 3 years. Until the vampire king walked through her diner door with 4 bodyguards and knelt at his feet. The bodyguards circled the booth, hands on weapons, while every vampire in the city now knew their missing monarch had been hiding in her corner booth. Maya Torres poured coffee at 6 in the morning, like she had every morning for 3 years. The pot heavy in her hand, steam curling up past Harold's face, while he smiled that soft, grateful smile that made the pre-dawn shift bearable. He sat in booth 7 by the window where the rain always streaked the glass in patterns like veins, his hands trembling around the mug the way they always did, age or illness, or something he never named. And she slid the cream across the table without asking, because he took 2 drops, never more, and his thank you came quiet as breath. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and hash browns, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the kind of place where truckers stopped between routes and night shift nurses gulped caffeine before collapsing into bed, and Maya had wiped these tables so many times she knew every crack in the vinyl booths, every stain the industrial cleaner could not touch. Harold fumbled with his wallet, pulling out crumpled dollar bills, a 5 for a $3 breakfast, and she waved him off like she always did, but he pressed it into her hand anyway, his skin papery and cold. She turned toward the coffee station to grab the pot for a refill when the door opened and the temperature dropped 10 degrees in a single breath. 4 men entered first, broad-shouldered and silent, moving with the synchronized precision of soldiers or predators, their suits black and tailored, earpieces visible, hands hovering near their sides where fabric bulged with concealed weight. They fanned out immediately, one blocking the door, one positioning himself by the kitchen, 2 scanning the windows, and the 2 truckers at the counter froze with forks halfway to their mouths. Then he walked in. The vampire king stepped through the doorway, and the world tilted sideways, rain-slicked light from the street cutting across his face, dark hair swept back, eyes like chips of black ice, a long coat that moved like liquid shadow, and every instinct in Maya's body screamed run, even though her feet would not obey. He did not look at her. He looked at Harold, and then Alexander Volkov, the vampire king, whose face she had seen on late-night news segments about territorial disputes and political summits she never fully understood, crossed the diner in 4 strides and dropped to one knee in front of booth 7. The entire diner went silent, the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes, the nurse's phone slipping from her hand and clattering on the tile, and Harold made a small broken sound like a bird with a crushed wing. The vampire king knelt there in a puddle of rainwater tracked in from the street, his coat pooling around him, and when he spoke his voice cracked on a single word. Father. Maya's hands started shaking so hard the coffee pot rattled against the burner, and she set it down before she dropped it, her back pressing against the counter, her mind trying to process the impossibility of the frail old man who tipped in singles and asked about her brother, and sometimes forgot his pills being vampire royalty, being the father of the creature kneeling in her diner like a penitent in a cathedral. Harold gripped his mug with both hands, his eyes wet, his mouth forming words that would not come, and finally he whispered, "I told you not to come," and the resignation in his voice made something in Maya's chest crack open. Alexander rose smoothly, his hand reaching out to touch Harold's shoulder, and Harold flinched, but did not pull away. And the vampire king's face was a mask of control, except for his eyes, which held 30 years of searching, of grief, of something close to relief and fury braided together. Then Alexander turned and looked at Maya for the first time. His gaze locked onto her name tag, onto the coffee pot still steaming on the burner, onto the crumpled $5 bill on the table, and his expression shifted into something colder, more calculating. One of the bodyguards stepped forward, a man with a square jaw and pale eyes, and he pulled a phone from his jacket and took Maya's photo without asking, the click of the camera shutter obscenely loud in the frozen diner. She opened her mouth to protest, but Alexander spoke first, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Everyone who served him, spoke to him, touched him, they are all in the network now. You have been marked for 3 years and you never knew. Maya's throat closed. Marked. The word tasted like metal. She forced air into her lungs and managed to say, "Marked, I just gave him coffee." And her voice sounded small and far away. The square-jawed bodyguard stepped closer, positioning himself between her and the door, and he spoke in accented English, Russian maybe, his tone flat and absolute. "The Covenant law is clear. Any human who provides sustained aid to a vampire of royal blood falls under Protection Clause 9. You belong to the crown now." The words landed like a fist to the gut. Belong. Not protected. Belong. Maya looked past the bodyguard to Harold, desperate for him to say this was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But Harold would not meet her eyes, his gaze fixed on the rain streaking the window, and he said so quietly she almost missed it, "I never wanted this for her." The nurse at the counter slid off her stool and edged toward the door, but the bodyguard stationed there shook his head once, and she froze. The truckers sat motionless, faces pale, and Maya realized with sickening clarity that everyone in this diner was a witness now. Everyone had seen the vampire king kneel to a man in booth 7, and whatever came next would swallow them all. Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the street where black SUVs idled with headlights cutting through the gray morning, and he said without turning, "The Dobrynin faction has been searching for my father for 30 years. They placed watchers on every diner, every bus stop, every place a vampire might hide in plain sight. This location is compromised. My people will secure the perimeter, but we have minutes, not hours." He turned back to Maya, and his face was stone. "You will come with us. It is not a request." Maya's pulse hammered in her ears. She thought about running, about screaming, about grabbing the phone behind the counter and calling 911. But the bodyguards stood like statues, their eyes tracking every shift of her weight, and she knew with brutal certainty that she would not make it 3 steps. Harold finally looked up, his watery eyes meeting hers, and he mouthed, "I am sorry." And the regret in his face was an ocean. Alexander gestured, and the square-jawed bodyguard whose name she would later learn was Constantine stepped forward, his hand out not to grab her but to guide her, a mockery of courtesy. "Miss Torres, we need to leave now, for your safety." She looked at Harold one more time, at the old man who asked for extra sugar, who told her stories about pigeons in the park, who once slipped her a 20 when her car broke down. And she tried to reconcile that person with a vampire king who abandoned a throne. The math did not work. Nothing worked. But Constantine was waiting, and Alexander was already moving toward the door, and the rain outside was picking up, drumming against the glass, and Maya felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She grabbed her apron, untying it with numb fingers, and the ties slipped through her hands twice before she got it off. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and fear. She walked past booth 7 and Harold reached out, his fingers brushing her wrist, and the cold of his skin burned. "Take care of him," he whispered, and she wanted to laugh because how could she take care of a vampire king? How could she take care of anything when her own life had just been shredded? But his grip tightened, and he said, "Please." And the desperation in that single word dragged her under. She nodded because what else could she do? Constantine opened the door and rain blew in, cold and sharp, and Maya stepped out into the gray morning, the pavement slick under her shoes, the SUVs waiting with engines running. Alexander was already inside the lead vehicle, Harold being helped into the second by another bodyguard, and Constantine gestured her toward the third. She climbed in and the door shut with a heavy click, and the locks engaged automatically. The interior smelled like leather and gun oil. Another bodyguard sat in the front seat, silent, and through the tinted window she watched Eddie's diner recede into the rain, the fluorescent lights still buzzing, the nurse and truckers still frozen inside like figures in a snow globe. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably her manager asking where she was. Probably Danny needing money again. Probably 1,000 normal things that belonged to a version of her life that no longer existed. The SUV pulled into traffic, smooth and fast, and Constantine's voice came from the front seat. "We are taking you to a secure location. The Vampire King will explain everything." She wanted to ask what everything meant, what marked meant, what belonged to the crown meant, but her voice had fled, and all she could do was sit there with her hands in her lap, her uniform still smelling like coffee and grease, while the city blurred past and the rain kept falling, and somewhere behind her, a throne she did not know existed, waited to devour her whole. The penthouse stretched out like a cage made of glass and money, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city Maya barely recognized from this height, the rain hammering against bulletproof panes that did not rattle, did not shake, just took the punishment in silence. She paced along the marble counters, her fingers trailing over surfaces so clean they squeaked, past minimalist furniture that looked like it cost more than her yearly salary, past a wall of monitors showing security feeds from every angle, lobby, stairwells, rooftop, the images cycling in silent rotation. Her reflection caught in the window, uniform still on, name tag crooked, hair escaping its ponytail, and she looked small and out of place, a smudge on an otherwise perfect canvas. Constantine stood by the monitors, tablet in hand, his face impassive, and when she demanded her phone, he pulled a burner from his jacket and held it out. "Your old number is compromised," he said, and the finality in his voice made her want to scream. She took the burner anyway, the plastic cheap and unfamiliar in her palm, no contacts, no photos, no tether to the life she knew. Alexander had removed his coat and stood by a bar cart, pouring deep red liquid from a crystal decanter into a glass, and for a moment, Maya's brain refused to process what that liquid was, until he raised it to his lips and drank. Blood. He was drinking blood in front of her like it was scotch, like it was normal, and her stomach lurched. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his hands trembling slightly as he set the glass down, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been grief. "My father disappeared 30 years ago. I was 19. He left no note, no explanation, no abdication ceremony. The inheritance right requires a formal transfer of power witnessed by the Conclave, and without it, the throne destabilized. Territories fractured, factions rose. We have been at the edge of civil war for 3 decades because he walked away without honoring the old laws." Maya stopped pacing, her hand braced against the cool marble. She stared at Harold, who sat by the window watching the rain, looking smaller than ever, his shoulders hunched, his hands folded in his lap like a penitent. He did not look like a king. He looked like the old man who forgot his pills, who smiled when she refilled his coffee, who slipped her extra money when he thought she was not paying attention. Alexander continued, his words clipped and controlled. "The Dobrynin faction believes Harold is plotting to reclaim the throne. They have been hunting him for decades, and now that they know where he was, they will eliminate any evidence of his hiding place. That means you." Maya's breath caught. "Me. I am evidence." Constantine stepped forward, tapping his tablet, and the monitor shifted to show grainy night vision footage. A timestamp reading 2 hours ago, her apartment door opening, 3 figures entering, moving through her rooms with precise efficiency. They opened her drawers, rifled through her closet, stood over her bed for long seconds, and one leaned down to pick up a photo from her nightstand, the one of her and Danny at their mother's funeral. Maya's knees went weak. "They were in my home." Constantine's voice was clinical. 3 vampires, Dobrynin enforcers. They planted listening devices and took samples, hair from your brush, prints from your door handles. They are building a case that you were complicit in hiding a fugitive king. The penalty for that under covenant law is blood bond. You would be locked to our family for life, forced into service, your autonomy erased. He said it like he was reading a weather report, like her entire future being obliterated was a minor inconvenience, and rage flared hot in her chest. She spun toward Alexander. "You brought this on me. I did not ask for any of this." "I poured coffee. That is all I did." Alexander met her eyes, and for a moment his control slipped, something raw and desperate flickering across his face. "I know, and I am sorry. But the situation is what it is, and we have 4 days before the emergency conclave convenes to decide my father's fate and yours. If you testify that he was mentally unfit, that he did not understand what he was doing when he left, the old laws allow for clemency. He would be exiled instead of executed, and you would be released with a new identity, protection, enough money to start over somewhere safe." Maya's hands clenched into fists. "You are asking me to lie under oath in a vampire court." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I am asking you to survive. The alternative is that the Dobrinins take you, torture you for information about where else my father might have gone, who else might have helped him, and then kill you to tie up loose ends." 50,000 alive, Constantine added quietly, glancing at Alexander with something close to concern. "The Dobrinin patriarch placed a bounty this morning. They want to question her themselves." The number hung in the air, obscene and cold, and Maya felt the walls closing in, the glass and marble and leather smell choking her. She looked at Harold again, and this time he turned from the window, his watery eyes meeting hers, and the weight of 3 years pressed down on her shoulders. He stood slowly, joints creaking, and crossed to where she stood, his movements careful and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost a whisper. "He is asking you to save yourself. I am asking you to end this cycle. Tell them I was sane. Tell them I chose to leave. Maybe then another king will have the courage to walk away." Maya stared at him. "You want me to condemn you?" Harold shook his head. "I am already condemned. I have been condemned since the night I put that crown on my head. But you are not part of this world, and you should not be dragged into it because you showed an old man kindness. Tell the truth, Maya. Tell them the crown makes monsters of everyone who wears it, and I could not be a monster anymore." Alexander made a frustrated sound, setting his glass down hard enough that it cracked, blood seeping across the marble. "Father, if she tells them that, they will execute you for treason. You violated every law we have. There is no mercy for a king who abandons his people." Harold's smile was sad and small. "I know, but I would rather die free than live as a liar." Maya's head spun, the two men pulling her in opposite directions, survival versus truth, lies versus execution, and she did not know how to choose, did not know what the right answer was when every option ended in blood. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass, watching the rain blur the city into impressionist streaks of light. Her reflection stared back, tired and scared, and behind her she could see Alexander and Harold, father and son, both of them worn down by a throne that took and never gave back. Constantine cleared his throat. "We have another problem. The surveillance footage from the diner is already circulating on encrypted vampire networks. Every faction knows Harold was found. They know Miss Torres was the one serving him. Some will want her dead. Others will want her alive to use as leverage. Either way, she is a target now, and this location is secure but not indefinitely. We have 4 days to prepare her testimony, move her to the conclave, and get her out before someone decides 50,000 is worth the risk." Maya turned, her voice hollow. "And if I refuse to testify at all?" Constantine and Alexander exchanged a glance. "Then the conclave assumes guilt by silence," Alexander said. "The blood bond is automatic. You become property of the crown, assigned to my household, forbidden from leaving vampire territory, your life no longer your own. It is a mercy compared to what the Dobrinins would do, but it is still a cage." She wanted to laugh. Mercy. As if there was any mercy in this room, in this situation, in a world where pouring coffee for 3 years could end with her life in ruins. She walked to the bathroom, needing space, needing air, and inside she found tailored clothes hanging in a closet, jeans in her size, sweaters, boots, everything she might need laid out like a hotel amenity. They had been planning this. They had known she would end up here, trapped, and they had prepared her cage in advance. She braced her hands on the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror, and thought about Danny, about the diner, about her mother's voice saying, "Take care of your brother," and she wondered if any of them had ever really been free or if they had all just been pretending. When she came back out, Harold was still by the window, and Alexander was on the phone speaking rapid Russian, his tone sharp and commanding, and Konstantin was reviewing the tablet, his face grim. She sat on the edge of a leather couch that probably cost more than her car and said, "I need to think." Konstantin nodded. "You have until tomorrow morning. The conclave preparation begins at dawn. We will need your statement, your testimony outline, everything documented and rehearsed. Vampire law does not allow for improvisation." Maya closed her eyes. Tomorrow morning. 4 days until the conclave. 30 years since Harold walked away. 3 years since she poured his first cup of coffee. The numbers stacked up like a ledger she could not balance, debts and payments she never agreed to. Alexander finished his call and sat across from her, his elbows on his knees, his face drawn. "I have been searching for him since I was 19 years old. 30 years of dead ends and false leads and wondering if he was alive or dead, or if he even wanted to be found." And then Constantine's people traced a pattern. An old man who appeared in the same diner every morning, same time, same booth, and the description matched. I did not believe it at first. I thought it was another dead end. But I came anyway. And there he was, drinking coffee, looking so ordinary I almost walked past him. His voice broke on the last word and he looked away, jaw tight. Harold spoke without turning from the window. "I worked as a janitor, a grocery bagger, a crossing guard outside an elementary school. I did every job I could find that let me be around people, normal people, people who did not care about power or territory or blood. I wanted to feel human again. I wanted to remember what it was like before the crown." Maya understood then, in a way that made her chest ache. Harold had not been hiding, he had been surviving. And she had been part of that survival. 3 years of ordinary mornings, of coffee and small talk, and a kindness that asked for nothing in return. And now that kindness was going to kill her, or bind her, or force her to choose between a lie that saved her and a truth that might save someone else. The monitors cycled through their feeds, the rain kept falling. And somewhere in the city, the Dobrynyns were planning, hunting, waiting for their chance. Konstantin's voice cut through the silence. "Miss Torres, what is your decision?" She looked at Harold, at Alexander, at the life she had lost the moment the vampire king walked through the diner door. She thought about her mother, about truth, about the cost of looking away when it mattered. And she said, "I need to see the footage again. All of it. Everything you have on the Dobrynyns, on the conclave, on what happens if I lie, and what happens if I do not. If I am going to choose, I need to know what I am choosing." Alexander nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Constantine pulled up the files, and Maya sat there in the glass cage, watching her life disassemble frame by frame, while the rain hammered the windows and the city glittered below, indifferent and cold. Maya spent 2 hours watching surveillance footage and reading covenant law summaries that Constantine pulled up on the tablet, her eyes burning, her mind struggling to process the layers of political maneuvering and ancient protocol that governed a world she never knew existed. And when she finally looked up, the sky outside had shifted from black to bruised purple, dawn coming, whether she was ready or not. Alexander sat across from her, silent, waiting, his face unreadable, and Harold had not moved from his position by the window, a statue carved from guilt and exhaustion. She set the tablet down, her hands flat on the marble table, and said, "I will testify truthfully, but only if you invoke the mirror oath." The room went completely still. Constantine's head snapped up from where he stood by the monitors, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to alarm. Alexander's eyes narrowed. "You know what that entails." Maya's voice shook, but she held his gaze. "I know enough. You bind your fate to my testimony. If I am harmed or coerced before I speak, you lose your claim to the throne permanently. If I am risking my life for the truth, you risk yours too." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a puzzle he could not solve, and for a long moment no one spoke, the silence heavy and electric. Then Constantine stepped forward, his voice tight. "Your Majesty, the mirror oath is political suicide. If the Dobrynyns even suspect you have invoked it, they will escalate. They will target Miss Torres specifically because harming her harms you. You would be handing them a weapon." Alexander did not look away from Maya. "I am aware." Harold finally turned from the window, his face stricken. "Alexander, no. There are other ways to protect her. You cannot throw away 3 decades of rebuilding the throne for a human girl you met yesterday." The words landed like a slap, but Maya did not flinch. She kept her eyes on Alexander, on the exhaustion etched into his face, on the tremor in his hands that he could not quite hide. She thought about the diner, about Harold's crumpled dollar bills, about the surveillance footage of strangers in her apartment, and she thought about her mother, who died because Maya worked doubles instead of being there, about Danny, who blamed her for it, about every choice she made that left her alone and guilty and wondering if kindness was just another word for cowardice. She had poured coffee for 3 years and asked for nothing, and now a vampire king was asking her to lie to save herself, and she could not do it, could not add another lie to the pile, could not look at Harold and tell a court he was insane when he was the sanest person in this nightmare. Alexander stood slowly, his movements deliberate, and he crossed to a cabinet along the wall, opening it to reveal a black velvet case. He lifted the case and brought it to the table, setting it down between them, and when he opened it, candlelight caught on a silver blade, ancient and inscribed with symbols Maya could not read, the metal etched with patterns that seemed to shift in the flickering light. "This is the oath blade," Alexander said quietly. "It has been in my family for 6 centuries. If I invoke the mirror oath, I bind my claim and my blood to your testimony. Your words become the foundation of my rule. If you are harmed, if you are coerced, if anyone attempts to force you to speak anything but your own truth, the bond breaks, and I lose everything. The throne, my title, my authority. I would be exiled, stripped of power, forbidden from vampire territories for the rest of my existence." Maya's throat tightened. "And if I lie?" Harold's voice came soft and broken. "If you lie, even to save him, the bond kills him within 3 days. The mirror oath has 2 clauses, Maya. The first protects you from outside coercion. The second ensures you speak only truth. If you lie, if you bend your words even slightly to spare him, his blood turns to poison and he dies in agony. You must tell the truth no matter what they threaten you with, no matter what it costs him." The weight of it settled on her shoulders like a physical thing, crushing and inescapable. She looked at the blade, at the symbols she could not read, at the blood already staining the edges from previous oaths sworn and broken. She thought about truth and lies and the space between them where most people lived, where she had lived, pouring coffee and smiling and pretending everything was fine when it was not. Alexander's voice was steady. "If you invoke this, you hold my life in your hands. I will trust you with everything I am, everything I have built. And in return, you will be forced to tell the truth, even if that truth destroys me. It is not a fair bargain, Miss Torres. It is not kind. But it is the only way to ensure your testimony is unassailable. The Dobrynyns cannot claim coercion if I have bound myself to your freedom. They cannot twist your words if your words are locked to my survival." Maya's hands shook. She pressed them flat against the table. "Why would you do this? Why would you give me this power? You do not know me. You do not know if I will protect you or condemn you. Alexander met her eyes, and something in his expression cracked open, raw and desperate. Because my father taught me that a crown means nothing if the people who put you there are liars and cowards. You are the only person in 30 years who saw him and did not want something. You gave him coffee and kindness, and you asked for nothing in return, not money, not favors, not access to power. That is worth dying for. Harold made a choked sound, his hand covering his mouth, tears streaking his face. Constantine opened his mouth to protest again, but Alexander silenced him with a single look, and the bodyguard stepped back, his jaw tight, his hand clenching into a fist. Alexander lifted the blade from the case, the silver cold and sharp, and he gestured to the center of the room. The ritual requires witnesses and flame. Constantine, clear the furniture. The bodyguards moved with military efficiency, pushing the couch and chairs to the walls, rolling up the rug to expose white marble floor. Another bodyguard brought candles from somewhere, thick pillars that smelled like beeswax, and something older, herbs maybe, and they arranged them in a circle, lighting each one until the room glowed with flickering golden light. The monitors on the wall went dark, the city outside invisible like and the only sound was the soft hiss of burning wicks. Maya stood in the center of the circle, her heart hammering, her uniform still smelling like coffee and grease, and Alexander stepped in across from her, the blade held loosely in his right hand. Constantine and 3 other bodyguards took positions around the circle, standing at attention, their faces grim. Harold moved to stand just outside the candles, his hands clasped like he was praying. Alexander's voice was formal now, stripped of emotion. Maya Renee Torres, do you accept the mirror oath? Do you bind your testimony to my blood, your truth to my fate? Maya's mouth was dry. She nodded, then forced herself to speak. I do. Alexander pressed the blade to his palm, the edge biting deep, and blood welled up, black in the candlelight, dripping onto the white marble floor where it pooled and spread in patterns that looked almost deliberate. He spoke in a language Maya did not know, the words old and harsh, Russian maybe, or something older. And then he switched to English, his voice ringing through the penthouse. I, Alexander Dmitry Volkov, bind my claim and my blood to the testimony of Maya Renee Torres. Let her words be unforced, let her truth be unbroken, or let me fall. Let no hand turn her, let no threat silence her, let her speak only what she knows and believes. And if she lies, even to spare me, let the bond take my life within 3 days. I swear this on the oath blade, on my father's name, on the throne I claim, so let it be witnessed. The bodyguards responded in unison. Witnessed. Harold's voice came last, broken and wet. Witnessed. The air in the room changed, charged like the moment before lightning strikes, and Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a tether snapping into place, invisible but undeniable. Alexander's blood on the floor began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, the light spreading through the marble like veins, and the candles flared all at once, flames shooting up a foot high before extinguishing simultaneously, plunging the room into darkness. Maya gasped, her hands flying out instinctively, and she felt Alexander's hand catch hers, his palm slick with blood, his grip steady. The lights flickered back on, the monitors rebooting, and the city reappeared outside the windows, indifferent and glittering. Alexander released her hand and stepped back, his palm still bleeding, and Constantine moved forward with bandages, wrapping the wound with practiced efficiency. Maya stared at the blood on the floor, the patterns already fading, and she felt the weight of what she had just done settle over her like a shroud. Alexander's voice was quiet. It is done. You hold my fate now, Miss Torres. Speak your truth at the conclave, and I will rise or fall by your words. Harold crossed into the circle, his face wet, and he gripped Maya's shoulders. You must be careful. They will try to trick you, to twist your words, to make you say something that is not quite true. Every word matters now. If you lie, even a small lie, even to protect him, the bond will kill him. Maya looked at Alexander, at the bandage around his hand, at the exhaustion and determination in his face, and she felt terror and fury and something close to awe. He had bet everything on her. A waitress who poured coffee, a stranger who knew nothing about vampire politics or ancient oaths or how to survive in a world where truth could kill. Constantine cleared his throat. We have 3 days to prepare your testimony. Every question they might ask, every trap they might set, we will rehearse until you can answer without hesitation. The Conclave does not forgive mistakes. Maya nodded, her voice barely a whisper. What have I done? Alexander's smile was sad and small. You have taken power from a king and made it your own. The Dobrinins wanted you silenced. Now if they touch you, they destroy me, and with me any chance of stability. You have become the most dangerous person in this city, Miss Torres, not because of what you can do, but because of what I have allowed you to do. The candles sat cold and dark around the circle, the wax pooling on the marble, and outside the rain had stopped, the sky lightening to gray. Maya looked at her hands, at the smear of Alexander's blood on her palm, and she wondered if her mother would be proud or horrified, if kindness was supposed to feel this much like a noose, if truth was supposed to cost this much. Harold's voice was soft. You can still walk away. Tell them you were coerced, that you do not remember, that you want no part of this. The oath binds him, not you. Maya shook her head. If I walk away, he loses the throne anyway. The oath requires my testimony. Harold's expression was pained. Yes. So the choice is already made. Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the city, and Maya saw the tremble in his shoulders, the weight he carried, the throne that had consumed his father and was now consuming him. She thought about the diner, about Booth 7, about 3 years of ordinary mornings that led to this moment, and she could not find the thread that connected them, could not see how pouring coffee became holding a vampire king's life in her blood-stained hands. Constantine handed her a towel, and she wiped her palm clean, the blood smearing before it came off, and she said, "When does the preparation start?" Constantine checked his watch. 2 hours. You should rest. Maya laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Rest. As if she could sleep knowing that every word she spoke in 3 days would either save a king or kill him. As if the weight of that was something you could set down and pick up again. She walked to the bathroom, needing space, needing air, and she locked the door and sat on the cold tile floor, her back against the wall. And she let herself shake, let herself feel the terror she had been holding back. Outside she could hear voices, Alexander and Constantine arguing in low tones, Harold's quiet weeping, and she pressed her hands over her ears and closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be normal, to be no one, to pour coffee and go home and sleep without nightmares. But that girl was gone, burned away in candlelight and blood, and the girl who remained had a vampire king's life tethered to her words, and 3 days to learn how to speak truth without flinching. The news of the mirror oath leaked within 6 hours, spreading through encrypted vampire networks faster than Maya could process, and Constantine tracked the breach to a junior bodyguard who had sent a single message to his cousin in the Dobrinin faction before Alexander's people disappeared him into whatever dark place traitors went. Maya did not ask. She sat at the marble table, rehearsing testimony with Constantine, answering the same questions over and over until her voice went hoarse. When the monitors flickered and showed a cleaning contractor entering the building lobby, credentials checked, clearance approved, pushing a cart toward the service elevator. Constantine's hand went to his earpiece, his face hardening, and he said something sharp in Russian before moving toward the door. Maya watched the monitor as the woman in the cleaning uniform stepped off the elevator 3 floors below, her movements efficient and unhurried. And something about the way she held herself, the precision in her steps, set off alarms in Maya's head. Constantine was already in the hallway, two bodyguards flanking him, and Maya saw the confrontation play out on the security feed, the cleaning woman's face calm, until Constantine grabbed her wrist and twisted, a knife clattering from her sleeve. They wrestled her to the ground, zip-tied her hands, dragged her into the penthouse while she smiled, teeth white and sharp, and dumped her in the corner where she sat silent and watchful, her eyes tracking every movement in the room. Alexander came out of the bedroom where he had been on calls with Conclave representatives, his face drawn, and he looked at the assassin the way someone looks at a rat in the kitchen, disgusted but unsurprised. Constantine swept the woman's cart, pulling out cleaning supplies, rags, a vacuum, and then his hand stopped on a small black device no bigger than a button, tucked inside a bottle of surface cleaner. He held it up, his expression grim, and said, "Listening device, active, transmitting for the last 40 minutes." The room went cold. Maya's stomach dropped. 40 minutes meant they had heard everything: the testimony rehearsal, the conclave strategies, Alexander's calls, all of it bleeding out to the Dobrynyns in real time. Constantine's team swept the penthouse, pulling devices from smoke detectors, from vents, from the underside of furniture, a dozen tiny dots of surveillance that turned the safe house into a stage where every word had been performance. Maya felt sick. The assassin in the corner kept smiling. Constantine played back an intercepted call on his tablet, audio crackling with encryption interference, and Maya listened to voices speaking English with heavy accents, discussing her like she was a problem to solve. "The girl has a brother," one voice said. "Drug possession arrest 3 years ago. We can use that. Frame her as desperate, manipulative, seduce the old king for money. Destroy her credibility before she even speaks." Another voice, older, colder. "And if the brother corroborates her story, then we eliminate him too. Simple. The Conclave does not care about dead humans." Maya's hands clenched the edge of the table, her knuckles white. They were going to drag Danny into this, weaponize his worst moments, the addiction that nearly killed him, the arrest that she had bailed him out of with money she did not have. And they were going to paint her as a liar and a manipulator, and there was nothing she could do to stop it, because the mirror oath meant she could not lie, could not bend the truth, could not even omit details without risking Alexander's life. Alexander set his phone down, his voice quiet and almost ashamed. "I can make the arrest disappear. Scrub the records. No one would ever know your brother was involved. It would take an hour, maybe less." Maya's refusal was immediate and fierce, her voice cutting through the room. "Then I would have to tell them you falsified records and you would die." "No." Alexander's jaw tightened. "They will destroy you with this. They will make you look like a criminal, like someone who cannot be trusted. Your testimony will be worthless." Maya stood, her chair scraping against marble. "Then let them try. I will not lie to save myself, and I will not let you lie to save me. That is the whole point of the mirror oath. If we start bending truth now, we are no better than them." Constantine stepped forward, his tone careful. "Miss Torres, there may be another option. If we bring your brother here, if he testifies on your behalf, it neutralizes the Dobrynin strategy. They cannot frame you as manipulative if your own family vouches for your character." Maya's breath caught. Danny. She had not spoken to him in 6 months, not since the fight after their mother's funeral, not since he screamed at her that she cared more about strangers than family, that she worked doubles to pay for treatment but was not there when their mother died, that Maya's kindness was just another form of abandonment. Bringing him here meant reopening wounds that had barely scabbed over, meant facing the anger and blame she had been avoiding, meant pulling him into danger he did not deserve. But the alternative was letting the Dobrynyns control the narrative, and Maya could not stomach that. She nodded slowly. "Bring him, but tell him the truth, all of it. Do not lie to get him here." Constantine made the call, and 2 hours later, Danny Torres arrived in handcuffs, Constantine's protocol for outside risks, flanked by bodyguards who released him only after sweeping him for devices and weapons. He stood in the center of the penthouse, thin and hollow-eyed, his hair longer than Maya remembered, his face shadowed with anger and confusion. He looked at her, at the marble and glass and leather, at the monitors showing security feeds, at Harold sitting quietly by the window, and his voice was rough with disbelief. You are really going to die for some vampire's dad. Mom needed you. I needed you. Where was this loyalty then? Maya's composure cracked, the careful control she had been holding for days splintering under the weight of his accusation. I was there. I was always there. You just do not remember because you were high. Danny flinched like she had struck him. His hands clenched into fists. I was grieving. She was our mother. Maya's voice shook. And I was grieving too, but I did not have the luxury of falling apart because someone had to pay the hospital bills, someone had to keep the lights on, someone had to make sure you did not kill yourself with whatever you were putting in your veins. I worked doubles. I took extra shifts. I did everything I could and it still was not enough. She died and you blamed me, and maybe you are right to blame me, but I cannot carry that anymore, Danny. I cannot. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Harold stood slowly, crossing to where Danny stood, and his voice was soft and careful. Your sister saved my life a dozen times. She talked me down from walking into traffic when my mind was not working right. She noticed the tremor in my hands that signaled a stroke and called an ambulance. She brought me food when I forgot to eat, checked on me when I did not show up at the diner, treated me like a person when I had forgotten what that felt like. She saves people. It is who she is. Danny stared at Harold, then at Maya, and something in his expression shifted, the anger bleeding into something more complicated. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. Constantine pulled up the surveillance footage on the monitors, showing the assassin entering the building, showing the Dobrynin enforcers in Maya's apartment, showing the intercepted calls planning to destroy her credibility. He played the audio where they discussed eliminating Danny, the cold, clinical way they talked about killing him to tie up loose ends, and Danny's face went white. They want to kill me because you poured coffee for an old man. Maya nodded. Yes. And they want to kill me because I will not lie about it. The mirror oath means I have to tell the truth at the Conclave, and if I do, Alexander keeps his throne and Harold gets exiled instead of executed. But the Dobrynins want Harold dead and Alexander discredited, so they are going to use your arrest, use our family, use everything they can to make me look like a liar before I even speak. Danny paced the kitchen, his hands in his hair, and Maya could see him processing, weighing, trying to find an angle that made sense. Finally, he stopped, his voice tight. What do you need me to do? Testify, Constantine said. Tell the conclave that your sister is honest, that she would not fabricate a relationship with Harold for money or power, that her character is beyond question. It will not stop the Dobrynins from attacking her, but it will blunt the impact. Danny looked at Maya, really looked at her, and she saw the little brother who used to follow her around asking questions, the kid who cried when their dad left, the teenager who got lost in pills and anger and grief. He nodded slowly. Okay, I will do it. But after this, after the conclave, you owe me the truth about why you care so much about these people, why you are willing to die for them. Maya's throat tightened. Deal. Constantine's earpiece crackled, and his expression shifted to alarm. He moved to the monitors, pulling up a feed that showed the building perimeter, and he swore in Russian. The listening device. They heard us bring in Danny. They know he is here. Alexander was already moving, phone to his ear, barking orders. How long do we have? Constantine checked his tablet, tracking signals Maya could not decipher. Minutes, maybe. The Dobrynins will move fast. We need to extract now. The penthouse erupted into controlled chaos. Bodyguards pulling weapons, sweeping rooms. Constantine coordinating extraction via encrypted radio, the static crackling through the tension. Maya grabbed Danny's arm. pulling him toward the door, but Alexander caught her shoulder. "We move the conclave up. Tomorrow night. We do not have time to secure another location." Constantine turned, his voice sharp with protest. "The Dobrynyns will call that a sign of weakness." Alexander's face was stone. "Let them. We end this before they kill her." The monitors showed black SUVs pulling up outside the building, figures emerging, moving with purpose. Constantine counted them off. 8 hostiles, ground floor, heading for the elevators. "We have 2 minutes." Harold moved to Maya's side, his hand shaking as he gripped her wrist. "I am sorry. I am so sorry I brought this on you." Maya did not have time to answer. Constantine was already pushing them toward the service exit, bodyguards forming a protective circle. The assassin in the corner still smiling as they left her zip-tied on the floor. The stairwell was concrete and cold, their footsteps echoing, and Maya could hear shouts from below, the Dobrynin enforcers breaching the building. Danny stumbled and she caught him, her breath coming fast, and Alexander was ahead of them, moving with inhuman speed, his coat billowing. They hit the basement garage and piled into waiting vehicles, engines already running, and the SUVs peeled out into the night, tires squealing. Maya pressed against the window, watching the building recede, and she saw figures on the roof, silhouettes against the city lights, watching them go. The listening device sat in a clear evidence bag on the seat beside Constantine, a tiny black dot that had upended everything, and Maya stared at it. At the physical proof of how easily safety could be stripped away. Danny sat across from her, his face pale, his hands shaking, and he said, "You are insane. You know that, right? Completely insane." Maya almost laughed. "Yeah, I know." The convoy moved through empty streets, heading to a secondary location Constantine would not name, and Alexander was on the phone coordinating with the Conclave, pushing the timeline, his voice clipped and authoritative. The city blurred past, neon signs and puddles reflecting streetlights, and Maya felt the walls closing in, the conclave now less than a day away, the testimony she had rehearsed suddenly inadequate against the machinery of vampire politics. Harold sat beside her, his hand over hers, and he whispered, "You do not have to do this. You can still walk away." Maya shook her head. "If I walk away now, we all die. The mirror oath, the Dobrynyns, all of it. We are past the point of walking away." The SUV hit a pothole and she jolted forward, her seatbelt catching, and she thought about her mother, about the hospital room, about the machines that beeped and hissed while Maya held her hand and promised to take care of Danny, to keep him safe, to be better. She had failed that promise in 100 small ways, and now here was a chance to succeed at something, to tell the truth and let the consequences fall where they would. And maybe that was insane, but it was the only thing she had left. Constantine's radio crackled. "Secondary location secure, ETA 5 minutes. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the vehicle's movement, the hum of the engine, Danny's breathing across from her, and she wondered if tomorrow night she would still be alive, if Alexander would still have his throne, if Harold would be free or executed, if any of them would survive the conclave's judgment. The rain started again, light at first, then harder, drumming on the roof, and through the window she could see the city stretching out, indifferent and cold, a million lives moving through their ordinary nights, while hers balanced on a knife edge. 2 a.m., 20 hours until the conclave, 20 hours to prepare for a performance where every word mattered, where lies meant death and truth might mean the same. She opened her eyes and met Alexander's gaze in the rearview mirror, and he nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of what they had both risked, what they both stood to lose. The SUV pulled into an underground garage, concrete and shadows, and Constantine was already out, scanning for threats, waving them forward. Maya stepped into the cold air, Danny beside her, Harold behind, and she felt the weight of the next 20 hours pressing down, inevitable as gravity, inescapable as truth. The conclave convened at midnight, In an abandoned opera house on the city's eastern edge, the building gothic and decaying, velvet seats moth-eaten, gold leaf peeling from the ceiling in strips that hung like dead skin, and chandeliers dark, except for a few bulbs rigged hastily to provide just enough light to see faces, but not enough to feel safe. 300 vampires filled the seats, their eyes catching the dim light like animals in the dark. And the air smelled like dust and old wood and something metallic that Maya recognized now as blood, always blood, the scent that clung to Alexander and Harold, and this whole cursed world. The arbiters stood at intervals around the room in white robes, their faces expressionless, ancient beyond measure, and they enforced the neutral ground with a presence that made even the Dobrynin patriarch sit still in the front row, flanked by his enforcers, his expression carved from stone and malice. Maya sat in a hard wooden chair on the stage, a spotlight angled directly into her eyes so she could not see the crowd, only shadows and the occasional glint of reflected light, and her hands gripped the armrests hard enough that her knuckles went white. Constantine had briefed her on what to expect, the questions, the traps, the way the Dobrynins would try to twist her words, but sitting here under the light with 300 vampires watching felt different than rehearsal, felt like standing naked in front of a firing squad. Alexander sat to the side, hands folded in his lap, jaw tight, his face a mask of control that she could see cracking at the edges, and Harold sat beside him, smaller than ever, his frailty returned now that the adrenaline of the last days had faded. Danny was somewhere in the back, escorted by bodyguards, a witness if needed, and Maya tried not to think about him watching this, watching her get torn apart in public. The Dobrynin patriarch stood, his voice smooth and cold, addressing the arbiters and the assembled conclave. "We are here to determine the fate of Harold Volkov, who abandoned his throne 30 years ago in violation of the inheritance right, and the human woman who harbored him, Maya Torres, who we believe was complicit in his hiding. We have evidence of a conspiracy, financial transactions, motel records, witness testimony that proves this woman seduced Harold Volkov for monetary gain and helped him evade discovery." The patriarch gestured, and an assistant brought forward documents, spreading them on a table for the arbiters to review, bank transfers with Maya's name, motel receipts, and then a woman was led onto the stage, cleaned up and dressed in a conservative suit, and Maya recognized her with a jolt of cold horror as the assassin from the penthouse, the one who had planted the listening devices, now playing the role of victim. The woman's voice was soft and trembling as she testified that she had seen Maya meeting Harold in secret, accepting money, discussing plans to keep him hidden, and the lies were so smoothly delivered that Maya felt dizzy, felt the room tilting. Alexander's lawyer, a thin vampire with silver hair, stood to object, but the arbiters waved him down, allowing the Dobrynins to present their full case first, and Maya sat there feeling the walls close in. Then it was her turn. The Dobrynin lawyer approached, a woman with sharp features and a voice that dripped false sympathy, and she circled Maya's chair like a predator sizing up prey. "Miss Torres, you work at a diner, is that correct? You make, what, minimum wage plus tips. Your mother died 3 years ago from cancer, leaving you with substantial medical debt. Your brother has a criminal record, drug possession, and you bailed him out. You were desperate for money, were you not?" Maya's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Yes, I work at a diner. Yes, my mother died. Yes, I had debt. But I never took money from Harold beyond what he tipped, and I never knew who he was until 4 days ago." The lawyer smiled, thin and cold. "Your mother died alone in a hospital while you were at work, correct? You chose your job over being with her in her final moments. That must weigh on you." Maya's breath caught, but she forced herself to answer. "Yes. And I would do it again because people needed me there. Someone had to pay the bills. Someone had to keep the lights on." The lawyer's smile widened. "So you admit you prioritize money over family." That you make calculated decisions about who deserves your time based on what they can give you. Maya's hands clenched. I prioritize survival. I do what I have to do. That does not mean I manipulated Harold. The lawyer produced a photograph, holding it up for the arbiters and the crowd, and Maya's stomach dropped because she recognized her apartment building, the front door, and Harold standing there in his worn coat, holding something. This photo was taken 6 months ago. Harold Volkov entering your apartment. Care to explain? Harold's face went ashen, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, and Alexander's eyes flicked to him, questioning, confused. Maya's mind raced, trying to remember, and then it hit her. The winter when her heat broke, when she came home to a freezing apartment and found a space heater on her doorstep with a note that said "Stay warm," unsigned. But she had known it was Harold because he had asked the day before if her landlord had fixed the furnace. She spoke quickly, her voice tight. My heat broke in January. Harold left a space heater on my doorstep. He never came inside. He just left it and walked away. The lawyer's expression was triumphant. A space heater. How intimate. How convenient that he knew where you lived, that he cared enough to bring you gifts. This is the behavior of a man and his mistress, not a customer and a waitress. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading through the opera house like fire, and Maya felt panic rising. She looked at Alexander, desperate, and saw his face tight with doubt, with the terrible possibility that maybe she had lied. Maybe the mirror oath was a mistake. Harold stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the stage, and his voice rang out stronger than Maya had ever heard it. I will submit to compulsion. Ask me anything. Let the truth end this. The opera house went silent. The arbiters conferred in low voices, and the head arbiter stepped forward, producing a vial of silver liquid that caught the light. Trial by witness. Verification is permitted under covenant law. Harold Volkov, do you consent to blood magic compulsion, understanding that you will be unable to lie and must answer any question posed to you? Harold nodded, his face pale but resolute. I consent. The arbiter approached, unscrewing the vial, and Harold tilted his head back as the liquid was poured into his mouth, thick and viscous, and he swallowed, his throat working. For a moment nothing happened, and then his eyes glazed over, turning a deep crimson, and when he spoke his voice was different, monotone, mechanical, stripped of inflection. I am ready. The Dobranin patriarch stood, his smile vicious. Did Maya Torres know you were a vampire king when she served you at the diner? No. She did not know until 4 days ago when my son found me. Did she accept money from you beyond normal tips? No. She often refused my tips. I had to insist. Did you enter her apartment 6 months ago? Yes. I left a space heater on her doorstep. She was cold. I did not go inside. I did not speak to her. I left the heater and walked away. The Dobranin patriarch's smile faded. He paced, thinking. And then he asked the question that would unravel everything. Why did you abdicate the throne 30 years ago? Harold's face contorted, fighting the compulsion. But the magic was relentless, dragging the words out of him. I left because I murdered my wife, Alexander's mother, to keep the throne. The crown demanded it. I could not live with what I had become. The opera house erupted, voices rising in shock and fury. And Maya felt the air leave her lungs. Alexander stood, his face drained of color, swaying slightly, and his voice was a broken whisper. No. Father, no. Harold's compulsion-driven monotone continued, relentless. The council told me she was plotting to install a rival, to overthrow me. I believed them. I did not question. I smothered her in her sleep. She struggled. I held the pillow until she stopped moving. Alexander was 7 years old. I told him she died of fever. I lied to my son for 30 years, because I could not bear to tell him I killed his mother for a crown. I did not even want. Alexander staggered, catching himself on the chair, and his face was a landscape of grief and horror and betrayal. The Dobrynin patriarch stood, his voice cutting through the chaos. Regicide. Harold Volkov murdered the queen and fled to avoid justice. The penalty is execution. Arrest him. The Dobrynin enforcers moved forward, advancing on Harold, and Constantine's bodyguards stepped in front, hands on weapons but not drawing, the tension a hair trigger away from bloodshed. Alexander turned to the arbiters, his voice shaking. I invoke my right to claim responsibility. My father's crimes are mine to bear. I failed to find him. I failed to stop him. I forfeit my claim to the throne. I abdicate. Arrest me instead. Let him go. The words hung in the air. Impossible, suicidal. And Maya lunged from her chair, Constantine catching her before she could reach Alexander. He is lying, she screamed. The oath, you cannot lie, you will die. Constantine's voice was grim, his hands holding her back. The oath dissolved the moment he abdicated. He is not the king anymore. He can lie now. Alexander turned to Maya, his eyes meeting hers, and his voice was soft, final. The oath ended. You are free. That is all that matters. Maya's scream echoed against the vaulted ceiling, raw and desperate. You cannot do this. I did not lie. You do not get to sacrifice yourself. Alexander smiled, sad and small. I am not sacrificing myself. I am choosing my father, like he should have chosen my mother, like I should have chosen him years ago. The Dobrynin patriarch laughed, cold and sharp. How noble! How pathetic! Execute them both! The crowd's murmur rose to a roar, some calling for blood, others for mercy, the conclave fracturing in real time. The arbiters raised their hands, their voices cutting through the noise. Silence. We will deliberate. But before they could continue, Constantine drew his weapon, the other bodyguards following suit, forming a tight circle around Alexander and Harold, and the Dobrynin enforcers pulled guns from their coats, the opera house transforming into a standoff, dozens of weapons aimed and ready. Maya stood in the center of it, her hands shaking, her mind reeling, and she looked at Harold, at the compulsion still holding him, his eyes red and empty, and she looked at Alexander, at the king who had bet everything on truth and was now throwing it all away for love. The head arbiter's voice boomed. Stand down. We invoke sanctuary pause. 72 hours to deliberate. No bloodshed on neutral ground. The covenant demands it. Slowly, reluctantly, the guns lowered, the bodyguards stepping back, the enforcers retreating, and the arbiters moved forward, white robes billowing, separating the factions with their presence alone. Maya felt hands on her arms, bodyguards escorting her off the stage, and she saw Alexander being led away, saw Harold collapsing as the compulsion released him, saw Danny in the crowd with his face buried in his hands. The opera house was chaos, controlled but barely, and as Maya was pulled down the stone stairs into the holding chambers beneath, she heard the arbiters announcing the sanctuary pause, 72 hours to decide the fate of two kings, and she knew with brutal certainty that nothing would ever be the same, that truth had cost more than she ever imagined, and that somehow, impossibly, she had won and lost everything in the same breath. The arbiters intervened before the first shot was fired, their white robes appearing from the opera house wings like ghosts summoned by desperation, and the ancient voice of the head arbiter cut through the chaos with a single word that made every vampire in the room freeze: sanctuary. The sanctuary pause was older than the covenant itself, a law so fundamental that even the Dobrynins could not contest it, and within minutes, the opera house was locked down, all weapons confiscated, all factions separated into holding chambers beneath the building, while the arbiters deliberated Harold's fate and Alexander's abdication in private council. Maya was escorted down stone stairs that spiraled into darkness, her legs shaking, Constantine's hand on her elbow, the only thing keeping her upright, and they walked past cells holding other witnesses, other players in this nightmare, until they reached hers at the end of a long corridor. The cell was medieval, stone walls slick with condensation, an iron bar door that clanged shut behind her, a single candle flickering in a sconce on the wall, and a cot that looked like it had been there for centuries. It smelled damp, like earth after rain, and the silence was profound. No traffic, no voices, just the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Maya sat on the cot, her head in her hands, and replayed the last 3 hours on loop. Harold's voice under compulsion confessing to murder, Alexander's abdication ringing through the opera house, the Dobrynin enforcers advancing until the arbiters appeared, and she could not tell if she had won or lost, if telling the truth had saved anyone or just condemned them all in different ways. She felt unmoored, adrift in a world where honesty was a weapon that cut both directions, and she wondered if her mother would be proud or ashamed. If pouring coffee for 3 years was supposed to end like this, locked in a stone cell beneath a vampire court waiting for judgment. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, and she looked up to see Constantine approaching, his face drawn, his eyes red-rimmed like he had been crying or trying not to. He stopped at the bars, his posture still military straight, but something broken underneath, and he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and slipped it through the bars without meeting her gaze. "He does not expect forgiveness," Constantine said quietly. "He just wanted you to know he meant every word of the oath." Then he turned and walked away before Maya could respond, his footsteps fading into silence. Maya unfolded the note, recognizing Alexander's handwriting, sharp and precise. "You kept your promise. I kept mine. No regrets." She stared at the words, her throat tight, and she thought about the mirror oath, about blood dripping onto marble, about a vampire king betting everything on a waitress he barely knew, and she grabbed the golf pencil from the small desk bolted to the wall and wrote on the margin in shaky letters, "Plenty of regrets. Starting with letting you be an idiot." She folded the note and set it on the floor by the bars, hoping someone would take it back, and she lay on the cot staring at the candle flame, watching shadows dance on the stone. An hour passed, maybe more, time moving strangely in the silence, and then a bodyguard she did not recognize appeared at her cell, unlocked the door just enough to slide in a paper cup and locked it again without a word. Maya sat up, confused, and lifted the cup to find coffee inside. Her exact order from the diner: 2 creams, 1 sugar, the blend she poured every morning, impossibly prepared in a vampire holding facility beneath an opera house. She held the cup with both hands, breathing in the steam, and the familiar smell broke something inside her. Tears spilling down her face, her shoulders shaking with silent laughter that turned into sobs. It was perfect. It was absurd. It was Alexander finding a way to say something he could not say in words, and Maya drank it slowly, letting the warmth spread through her chest, and she cried until there was nothing left. At dawn, an arbiter arrived, ancient and still, face like carved wood, expression unreadable. The arbiter carried an envelope sealed with red wax, and the voice that emerged was neutral, stripped of emotion. "The conclave has deliberated. Harold Volkov will face exile, not execution. Alexander Volkov's abdication stands, but he is free. The cost is 50 years forbidden from vampire territories. He will be human-adjacent, powerless, stripped of title and authority. The Dobrynins contested, but your testimony under the mirror oath could not be refuted." Harold's compelled confession, however, supersedes all prior claims. He is exiled. Alexander is, in a manner of speaking, free. The arbiter handed her the envelope and a second document, a folded piece of parchment that felt heavy and official. "The conclave recognizes sacrifice. This is insufficient recompense, but it is what we offer." Then the arbiter turned and left, the iron door swinging open behind, no longer locked. Maya sat for a long moment, processing the words. Harold exiled. Alexander free but forbidden. The mirror oath fulfilled. She opened the second document and found a deed, legal and stamped, transferring ownership of the building that housed the diner to her name, signed by Alexander Volkov in ink that looked fresh. On the back, in his handwriting, a single line. You saved my father by seeing him. Maybe you will save me by remembering I tried. Maya's chest ached, the weight of it crushing, and she folded the deed carefully, sliding it into her pocket, and she stood on legs that felt like they might give out. The corridor was empty when she emerged. No guards, no bodyguards, just stone and shadows, and the faint smell of candle wax. She climbed the stairs, her footsteps echoing, and pushed open the door at the top to find the opera house empty. The velvet seats dusty and the gray morning light filtering through broken stained glass windows. Outside, rain was falling again, light and persistent, and the cobblestones gleamed wet under the bruised purple-pink sky. Danny was waiting by a yellow cab, leaning against the door, smoking a cigarette, and when he saw her he dropped it and crushed it under his heel and pulled her into a hug that smelled like tobacco and exhaustion. "You are insane," he said into her hair. "But I get it now." Maya held him tight, her face pressed against his shoulder, and she nodded because words felt impossible. They stood there in the rain, two siblings who had spent years avoiding each other, and Maya thought about their mother, about hospital rooms and broken promises, and she whispered, "I am sorry I was not there when she died." Danny pulled back, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes wet. "I am sorry I blamed you. You were doing your best, we both were." They got into the cab and it smelled like air freshener and old vinyl, familiar and ordinary, and the driver pulled into traffic without asking where they were going, heading somewhere that was not here, away from the opera house and the vampires and the judgment. Maya watched the city scroll past, delivery trucks making morning rounds, joggers braving the rain, the world waking up indifferent to what had happened in the stone chambers below the earth. Danny fell asleep against the window, his breathing evening out, and Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. Her real phone returned to her at some point, and she pulled it out to see a message from an unknown number. "Coffee tomorrow, 6 a.m. I will be the one who tips too much." Maya read it twice, 3 times, her thumb hovering over the reply field, and she thought about Alexander stripped of power, forbidden from his own territories, human adjacent and powerless. And she thought about the mirror oath, about truth and consequence, about the cost of seeing people clearly. She thought about Harold, exiled to some distant place where vampires sent their failures, and she thought about Constantine, who had lost his king, and she thought about the diner, about Booth 7, about ordinary mornings that had led to extraordinary ruin. She locked the screen without replying, sliding the phone back into her pocket, but the smile stayed on her face, small and complicated and real. Danny stirred, half awake, and mumbled, "You gonna see him again?" Maya looked out the window at the rain streaking the glass, at her reflection superimposed over the city, and she saw someone changed, someone who had walked into a vampire court and told the truth even when it hurt, someone who had held a king's life in her hands and not flinched. "I do not know," she said quietly. "Maybe. Probably. God, I am an idiot." Danny's laugh was soft and rough. "Yeah, but you are his kind of idiot." The cab turned a corner and the opera house disappeared behind them, Gothic arches receding into the gray, and Maya thought about tomorrow morning, about 6 a.m., about whether she would go to the diner or stay away, about whether some stories ended or just paused, waiting for someone to be brave enough to pick them up again. The deed in her pocket felt like a promise and a question, Alexander's final gesture before exile, and she traced the edges through the fabric, the paper solid and real. The city stretched out around them, a million lives intersecting and diverging, And Maya was just one more person in a cab heading home, except she was not the same person who had left, and home was not the same place it had been. Constantine had nodded to her when she walked out of the opera house, a soldier's salute from where he stood in the doorway with his phone to his ear, coordinating something she would never know about. And in that nod was acknowledgement, respect, goodbye. She wondered where Alexander was now, if he was saying goodbye to Harold, if they had an hour or a day, or if exile meant immediate separation. And she wondered if 50 years was a long time for a vampire, or if it passed like nothing. And she wondered if he would really show up at the diner tomorrow, or if the text was just a wish, a hope, a way of saying I am still here, even if I am not. The rain picked up, drumming harder on the cab roof, and Danny shifted in his sleep, his head tilting against the window. And Maya closed her eyes and let herself breathe, let herself feel the exhaustion and relief and grief all tangled together. She had told the truth. She had kept the mirror oath. Harold was alive, exiled, but alive. Alexander was free, powerless, but free. The Dobrynins had lost. And she, Maya Torres, waitress and sister and accidental kingmaker, was going home with a deed to a diner and a text message she had not answered. The cab pulled up outside her apartment building, the one the Dobrynin enforcers had searched, and Maya paid the driver with crumpled bills from her pocket, helping Danny out onto the sidewalk. The rain had softened to mist, the sky lightening, and she looked up at her window, at the life waiting inside, ordinary and small, and hers. Danny squeezed her hand. You did good. Maya nodded, her throat tight. We survived. That is something. They climbed the stairs together, Danny leaning on her slightly, and Maya unlocked her door to find everything exactly as she had left it. The photo of their mother still on the nightstand, the dishes still in the sink, the world unchanged even though she was not. She made coffee, the cheap kind from the grocery store, and they sat at her tiny kitchen table drinking it in silence, and she thought about tomorrow, about 6 a.m., about whether she would go to the diner or let the text sit unanswered, a door left open but not walked through. Outside, the city woke up fully, the sun breaking through clouds, light spilling across the wet streets. And Maya's phone sat on the table between them, screen dark, the message waiting. She did not know what she would do, she did not know what came next. But the smile stayed, and the coffee was warm, and for the first time in days, she felt like maybe, just maybe, the truth had been worth it after all.